So, skin divers. Now, I've never owned what is referred to as a skin diver because I was never a huge fan of the look originally, and the only budget ones that I could get my hands on were the 62 mass homages, and those are nice, but they don't really have a sense of originality, if you know what I mean. Enter ROIH, and more specifically, the SHEK-O Matic. And my attention and my interest suddenly peak because, I mean, look at this thing. It's absolutely amazing. I absolutely love it when micro brands put a more modern twist, like the different use of materials on a vintage design, not just to bring it up to standards, but to change the presence altogether. This has a lot more than the skin diver look going for it, which personally I feel that is the only thing that refers to when you say skin diver, just the look. Now, that being said, this was the main source of inspiration behind the design, as Hong Kong based micro brand ROIH watches, aka Roots of Industrial Heritage, have aimed to encapsulate with the retro look, which they genuinely did. And speaking of industrial, for me this has the industrial look. There's a link down below to the website if you want to check them out. And while we're there and on the subject, I'm trying to grow the channel to get more and more watches in. So if you really like my content and the style of content that I produce, really love if you could subscribe to the channel. Really helps me out. I've been wearing this for a while now and I can totally live with it day to day, but not on all fronts. But this is a very capable watch, not just visually and also physically. Let's take a closer look. There are a few things to address here. First of all, the price. At the moment, this is $429, and for what you're getting, you get quite a few interesting specs with a modern twist on a skin diver. Secondly, let's address the name, SHEK-O Matic. This is named after a beach in Hong Kong called Shek-O, which by the way is beautiful, so I can see the diver water association there. But let's start breaking it down a bit further because there's more to the look than to look at. In terms of dimensions, this would sound very appealing to people that have smaller wrists, but there are some things to be aware of. So the case diameter is 39 millimeters, we have a lug width of 20 millimeters, we have a thickness of 13.5 with a domed sapphire crystal. And lastly, the interesting part, which is the lug to lug, is 50 millimeters. I mean, that's the interesting part with the dimensions, but the cooler part, or the even more interesting part, is the weight. Sized up to my 6.3 inch wrist, this weighs 97 grams on the titanium bracelet. Can't even feel it. I mean, I would switch between this and my Hamilton Khaki Auto, which is on a bracelet, and the weight difference is absolutely insane. Apart from the bracelet that it comes on, ROIH will supply an additional strap in the box, which brings the weight even lower. Now we'll get to that in a little while. And now let's break down the dimensions. 50 millimeters lug to lug for a 39 millimeter case. Wouldn't sound that much, but for me this wears more like a 40, and those long lugs are just about my limit. If you have a 7-inch wrist and above, that is no problem. You have to wear it on a strap, then those lugs become a bit more visible or more pronounced depending on your wrist size. This is not particularly a huge problem with practicality, but you might have a bit of a overhang if you have a smaller wrist. And also having such a long lug to lug for a 39 millimeter case would make this top heavy, but clearly this is not the case since we have a titanium build. So if I look back at the way this wears with the long lug to lug, and considering the fact that it's a 39 millimeter case, I can totally live with this even if it has a slight overhang. And while we're on the subject of titanium, let's have a look at the overall case construction. All titanium, like I was mentioning, were a combination of bead blasted and polished finish. The cool thing is that you have an exposed area under the bezel and on the back of the case. Enough to see the separation in the lines of the case, but not enough to scratch. And the more exposed surfaces have the finishing that could take the abuse. Small little details that like this just give it more character. At the 3 we have a screw down crown, which is gold plated, which gives it a stated water resistance of 200 meters with the screw down case back. And finally, a titanium bezel loomed at the 12, which is unidirectional, no backplate, and has 120 questionable clicks. I think that is the first time I use that term to describe a bezel, but it's not as bad as it looks. Let's take a step back and analyze everything. So first of all, the crown. I don't know if this is intentional, but I think that this model has the longest stem I have ever seen on any watch. When you pull out to set the watch, when you pull the crown out to set the time, I mean, it really comes out. If they all have it, this is brilliant, because in my book, this makes it so much easier to operate. Not that it was bad in the first place, but I just think you have more grip when you twist. Talk about that bezel. First of all, the clicks, 120 questionable clicks. The thing with that is that they're not as ratchety as you would expect. From my experience, there's still 120 clicks there, but this is a common thing with titanium bezels, and I could perfectly live with that. I don't mind that because I don't use this to time anything. And the second part is there's only lume at the 12 o'clock pip on the bezel. Now the pip at the 12, I don't really mind that. Again, I said it before, I think we all need to get away from this whole thing of, oh yeah, it's not a fully lume bezel, therefore it's not a diver thing. It's like, no, it's not the 1960s, so therefore I can live without having the extra lume on it. This will never see that much water. Honestly, like, I will never take this into the water and go, oh my God, I can't time my air, because I don't dive, first of all. Therefore, if I look at it, the visual part, the bezel looks great. I really don't mind one or the other. I will never not buy a watch because the bezel is not fully lumed, or it's not, you know, it doesn't have the timing thing. So personally, I don't mind, and I think it looks great the way it does. Let's move on to the dial now. The dial is probably one of my favorite parts. First of all, this is covered by a domed piece of sapphire crystal. And to be completely honest, I am a sucker for a textured dial that is not done over the top. And when I say not over the top, I mean not in your face bright. I think there's a time and a place for those, and this is not it. But just again, to go back to earth. But going back to this, we have this tarmac black that goes dark gray, depending on how the light hits it. And this is very, very well laid out. So much going on without looking too crowded. The hands are long, the applied baton indices are also long, and on top of that, you also have a minute track on the chapter ring. The printing is very well done and the contrasts are spot on. And while we're talking about printing, logo at the 12 and just some specs at the 6. This definitely gives it the visual balance, but I wouldn't have had at the 6, instead of self-winding, I would have put something else. I don't know, I just wouldn't have had that. This is more of a personal thing, but I'm going through this with a fine comb at this stage. Another thing that I like is the gold-plated seconds hand that complements the crown. I think this again gives it a bit of color, if you can call it that. Well, something else apart from the neutral colors that it already has. And it just gives it a vintage nod, kind of like, yeah, see what I did there? Throughout the dial part up, I'm just going to touch on the lume. So we have BGW9, no excessive amounts here, but it's up there with the prices they're charging for it, and it's up there with micro brand standards within the same price range. It lasts long enough, but the surfaces are relatively small, so it's much better than, let's say, your average AliExpress brand, but this is not its strongest point. Just not enough service overall, but they are done quite well for the price. One thing that I believe is a bit of a controversial topic in this case is the movement. We have the trusty NH35 inside that has proven itself in reliability over time, and it's a common thing at this price point depending how you look at it. Well, it is or it isn't a common thing. And hear me out. I feel that nowadays, in a way, you're expecting a Miyota 9000 series for the price, but you'd still find this in the odd brand that has it. This particular one runs at plus 11 seconds per day, which is within stated tolerances, but a bit on the higher side. Take that as you will, but for me it gets points on reliability, but a Miyota would have been an improvement in this case. And to round it all up, as usual guys, we're going to touch up on the last thing, which is the bracelet. All titanium, 3-piece, H-link style with an angular design. Tapers from 20 at the lugs to 16 at the clasp. This is a milled lower and stamped upper with 3 micro adjusts, and also we have push pins to adjust. Now my thoughts are that it does the job, and hear me out because I'm going on a bit of a rant again. The bracelet is comfy, and the only thing that I have to complain about here is the fact that you only have 3 micro adjusts, and that's it. I mean, who cares if you have screw pins? Personally, if these are done well and they work, I'm not particularly bothered about that because it does. And lastly, the fact that you have a stamped upper. In most cases, if this is thick and this is, if I'm paying 700 euros for a watch, and I'm not, because this is not one of them, yeah, maybe. And Seiko charged those prices already anyway for something that is very similar in quality. So everyone stop complaining. But George, it's not quality. Like, you have to understand that small brands like this don't make a huge profit on their watches. So sometimes they have to cut corners that most of us take for granted. We just want it all cheap. That's the problem. And with that, I'll kind of try and draw the line. Well, first on the bracelet and then for the whole watch. The bracelet is perfectly fine. And also this comes in with another strap in the box. And to put it all in perspective with the watch overall, the SHEK-O Matic is a bit of an interesting one because it competes in this price point with the RZE, and they have a few more models to choose from. But they do have their own personal twist on the design. Between the two brands, I would take this because it has a more day-to-day familiar look that blends in a bit more with your regular lifestyle. I would love to see a second watch come from them to see what else they can come up with. But again, this is not specifically a reflection on the watch. I do like the way this wears. I think you're getting an amazing watch for the money, and I love the design, and I do love the colors chosen here. But that's just my opinion. That was it from me, guys. I hope you enjoyed my review and my little rant. I'm starting to have more and more of these things recently. Click a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't so. Check them out, the link down below. ROIH watches. Thank you very much for sending this in for review. I really appreciate it. And I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.